Hey everybody, I want to try an experiment. It is an ill-advised experiment, but an experiment nonetheless. Being on the autism spectrum, some things will always remain confusing and elusive to me. And so I feel like sometimes if I'm confused, it's best to just ask. I want to further clarify that what I am saying here is sincere. I'm not trying to be sarcastic or ironic. I genuinely am asking. Anyway, so here's the setup. 9 years ago, I went to a friend's birthday party at a strip club called Tattletale in the Atlanta area. Now, Tattletale is a rather famous Atlanta strip club. It's mentioned in the Motley Crue song Girls, 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 etc., and it's one of the longest standing and most highly lauded strip clubs in Atlanta alongside the Cheetah. Anyway, so while I was there, I got a lap dance from a stripper named Molly. I thought she was really cute. She looked great naked, and she gave me a very thorough and very enthusiastic lap dance for which I handsomely compensated her. A few days later, I was on some podcast, some YouTube video live stream podcast thing. I can't even remember what it was. The interview itself has been lost to antiquity. And I mentioned the subject of strippers or something like that came up. And I mentioned to the podcaster that if he was ever in Atlanta, he ought to, and this is not verbatim, but it was something like, if he was ever in Atlanta, he ought to come look up Molly at Tattletale. That she would take care of his needs. That comment got a remarkable level of blowback, much of which persists to this day, and the most persistent motivations for maintaining it are motivations I don't understand. Because some of the people who responded negatively to that statement, I get. I understand people who have religious convictions, for example, that would prohibit them from enjoying adult entertainment in that way, or paying for the services of a sex worker. I don't agree with those views, but I at least understand those being a motive force for their convictions. I understand the political correctness police, the woke contingent, who are motivated by a deep and visceral disdain for many of them just heterosexuality in general, but especially for any heterosexuality that occurs in the context of sex work and that sort of thing. I get that. I get it if you are on a moral, you have a morally righteous crusade that pits you against such an activity. And the thing is, I have done a lot of dumb things in my life, and in pretty much all of those cases where I've had to learn my lesson the hard way, I understand I'm eventually able to understand what it is I did wrong and why, and not do it again. But in the case of getting a lap dance from Molly at Tattletale, this is regarded by people who continue to message me to this day about this is regarded as something that is supposed to be an ongoing finger in my eye. I am supposed to feel shamed and ridiculed and mocked for having gotten a lap dance from a stripper named Molly at Tattletale 9 years ago. And so much so that one day prior to the recording of this video, I woke up to a comment on one of my videos from someone that just said, "How is Molly from Tattletale?" And that was done in response to a couple of videos that I had made to the user Colonel Kurtz, who had done some rather, without getting off into the weeds of that, some rather controversial things that I personally don't agree with, and I was expressing my views on that. That person was asking that question, I think, with the intent of disarming my confidence, cutting me down, making me ashamed, and making me want to withdraw my observations about Colonel Kurtz, I think. And that person joins a long line of people who continue to bring up Molly from Tattletale over and over again, as if just the fact that this occurred is something that I'm supposed to be deeply ashamed of. Over the summer, somebody contacted me claiming that Molly had died of a drug overdose and that they were collecting money for her funeral. And that thankfully proved not to be true. And I found that out by checking her socials. Anyway, but that it persists and it goes on. And, you know, friends who I have told about this video I wanted to make have all said, these people are trolls. Why do you care what they think? And the answer is because my self-esteem is very low, and all of you live rent-free inside my head. And again, this is why I emphasize that I'm not being sarcastic or ironic. I'm quite serious and erudite in what I'm trying to get across here. And I don't understand, of all of the things that I've done, why this one thing persists as being like the gerbil to my Richard Gere, basically. And I don't understand why this one thing persists as this mark of shame. Is it shameful because purchasing the services of a sex worker, or even something as mild as receiving a lap dance, is indicative of someone being so socially inept that they could not convince a woman to engage with them otherwise without exchanging money? Maybe that's it. I just don't understand the motivation, especially because I can tell by the tonality of the person asking the question kind of what demographic they fall into. For example, I remember one person commented on the original interview and said, doesn't Jordan understand that now that he said that, Molly's going to have tons of drunk, horny men showing up at her place of business? And I wanted to ask that person, do you not understand that drunk, horny men are how Molly makes her living? That she wants drunk, horny men to show up at her place of business? And see, that goes back to what I said earlier about the type of person for whom any kind of heterosexual, the concept of, for someone like that, the concept of heterosexuality being a reciprocal concept on the part of the woman is just a totally alien concept to them. But it stays with me, and what's interesting to me is that throughout my life, I have always been, anytime I have tried to even just put my foot in the door of participating in so-called lad culture, I get laughed out of the room by the lads in the culture. The ones who, throughout my life, the men who make the biggest show of trying to appeal to women, the men who are the evolutionary descendants of the gorillas that pounded their chests and made as much noise as possible to impress the females, they have always gone out of their way to make sure that I knew on no uncertain terms chimpanzees, not gorillas, I apologize, to make sure that I knew on no uncertain terms that I was not welcome in this. In my younger years, they would become very violent, and I've talked extensively on my channel about two young men who ran a gang when I was in school, where they would beat up girls for talking to me. And that was an extremely disturbing experience for me. And the adult version of that throughout my life has always gone out of its way to make sure that I knew on no uncertain terms that I was a failure, an immediate and automatic failure with women the minute I walked through the door, the minute I showed my face. And it's very difficult for me and very disheartening for me to go on that way. I've accepted it. I'm just trying to understand it. And as I try to put the pieces together as best I can. But I bring it up because I feel like, I think we all have our mental construct, our archetypal construct of what we think of as an internet troll. Certainly that person has been, the stereotypes about that person as being an overly aggressive, hypersexual, yet sexually frustrated dude bro. That stereotype is certainly what comes to mind for me when I encounter internet trolls. And the question that what occurs to me is, in my mind, that sort of person, if I were, it seems to me like that sort of person would be the sort of person who's, in his boorish and animalistic attitudes towards women, perfectly happy to do something like purchase the services of a stripper for a lap dance. So it's confusing to me on those grounds. And because of that, I'm making this video because I want to stand up and own this thing. For whatever reason people seem to see this as a source of abject shame and humiliation for me, I want to stand up and own it. So here's the video, me acknowledging it and talking about it. And also an opportunity when these people write in, rather than just delete, block, as has gone on for 9 years now. Now I can refer you to a centralized location where you can actually post about this, talk about it, and commiserate about it. And that's what's interesting is, I know it sounds paradoxical. It sounds like a very bad, ill-advised idea, and I realize it probably is. But as an experiment, I want to try it. I want to open the floor to you, and I want to actually hear why this is so funny to you. I want to know why it's so funny to you, and I want to know why it's so difficult for you and people like you to accept the idea that I could be sexually involved with women. One of the reasons that sex and relationships cease to be satisfying to me is because anytime I got into one of them, I would just be sitting there. I would find myself sitting there thinking, no one will believe me. Nobody would believe me. Or more specifically, the lads in lad culture would not believe me if I told them that I had been with this woman. They would not believe me. They would laugh me out of the room. Some of the more vicious ones would start wanting to have some sort of physical altercation or make ominous threats about the idea of me being involved with women. And so there was never any sense of social validation from being with women. I always felt like the same loser, just a loser that had maybe duped or somehow duped this woman, or maybe inadvertently managed to take advantage of a lack of perception or understanding on her part. And so that's one of the reasons that relationships just started to seem very unsatisfying to me, because all my life I've been trying to prove to other people that I am even welcome in the room with them when it comes to relationships. And the sad reality is that that is an overwhelming, that constitutes the overwhelming majority of what I want from relationships, even if, to such a degree that personal enjoyment and personal satisfaction constitutes maybe a fraction of a decimal point of what I would want out of a relationship, and just proving the rest of the world wrong is the main thing that I would want. This has stayed with me my whole life in various incarnations. I don't have to transfer I don't have to transfer the knowledge of my past failures to other people in order for it to persist. It just automatically does. But I do have two observations, though, as in the closing minutes of this video, two things that I did want to say. When this controversy, I don't understand why it's a controversy, but anyway, when this nonsense first presented itself, people started contacting Molly on the internet and harassing her. I happen to know that some of the people who were doing that were the exact self-same people who made tremendous noise about women being harassed on the internet. The hypocrisy of that really boils my blood. To me, that is evidence that you don't care about women being harassed on the internet. You care about women who share your political beliefs being harassed on the internet. There is something about the PC police, the woke contingent, that has always had tremendous disdain for sex workers. Really tremendous disdain for women who just like flaunting their sexuality or have any degree of sexual confidence whatsoever. And I think that's why such people find such tremendous common cause with the religious right when it comes to banning sex work and banning access to sex work, pornography, adult media, that sort of thing. That really boils my blood. And for the record, I happen to know that Molly has no problem with me talking about this, because back when that controversy initially presented itself and people started contacting Molly, I reached out to her and apologized if I had caused her any undue grief or misery or anything like that. And she said it was fine. Anyway, one thing occurs to me, though, as I'm addressing the trolls. It's interesting that among internet trolls, among people who make it their business to be pains in the asses on the internet, the support for Donald Trump is nearly 100%. The so-called basket of deplorables that Hillary Clinton referred to, that tends to be how internet trolls and people who carry on in this manner online, that tends to be how they align. I'm not aware of any, I'm not aware of any, Green Party trolls or anything like that. So the reason I bring that up, though, is because the trolls have always made a great show of not caring about people who say that they're offended. And I understand that. Certainly, I too find people who go around saying that they're offended and their delicate sensibilities have been trod upon and all of that. I find those people to be haughty and annoying and pretentious and asinine. And like so many, I do, there are times when I relish doing something that completely innocuous that those people are somehow offended by, or something like that. And so I get that. I get being annoyed by the PC police, by the outrage, the perpetually aggrieved outrage mob and that sort of thing. And I wonder, the sociological policing that occurs among such internet trolls, the deplorables so-called, seems to be cringiness. Rather than not wanting to offend people, or complaining about being offended, Instead, they worry about how cringy they seem or how cringy other people seem. And the word cringe has absolutely been weaponized by such people. And I wonder, and as you the troll who feels it necessary to bring up Molly as you're formulating your response, that's something I'd really like you to weigh in on. Do you think possibly that your fascination with things that you find cringy is actually a manifestation of your capacity to be offended, that rather than being offended you feel cringe at what has happened, that it's a new and different way of feeling offended, and that you are policing people's behavior on the basis of your sense of being offended, just under a new guise and under a new language and a new tonality. That's my thought. Irrespective of that, in closing, I will say that I do not regret getting a lap dance from Molly 9 years ago. I have never regretted it, and I probably would have forgotten about it a long time ago. But for some reason, this persists. For some reason, it is the height of shame. It is a thing so pathetic of me to have done that I ought to hang my head in shame, turn and leave the room anytime I have presented myself in a confident manner, simply for having done it. That if I take a confident stand on something, if I get up on my soapbox as I did with Colonel Kurtz, and I express my views and make my viewpoint known, the only thing that's necessary to cut me down, to render me ashamed and pathetic and unworthy of attention, is to bring up Molly and the time I got a lap dance from Molly at Tattletale. I don't understand it. I genuinely don't. And hopefully this little discussion has given you some idea as to my thought process. But anyway, I welcome your responses.